One of the key lessons that I've been learning in my life is that God provides, and that God loves it when we volunteer and we step out in faith, not knowing if He will provide, and then He comes through for us on our behalf and He gets the credit. And I love that. A story that really illustrates this for me, it was around 15 years or so ago. We had moved from Mozambique down to Cape Town. We had started a communication team serving YWAM projects in Africa. My heart was very much in Mozambique as well, particularly in the work amongst the unreached in the Zambezi Delta. And I'd made a commitment to my old team leader from Mozambique that I would go up to help make a video about the pioneer work that was happening in the Zambezi Delta. So we'd set a tentative date, and that date was coming up fast. I think it was around October at this point, and I was due to go up in November. But I knew that we'd also planned to go back to the UK for Christmas, and we really wanted to reconnect with our church. We wanted to reconnect with supporters. It was quite a difficult time in our lives. Our costs were rising. We had a new baby. We were renting a house. It was considerably more expensive living in South Africa, and all of that was weighing in my mind. And when it came down to it, I realised we simply did not have the money for me to go to Mozambique. I was due to go to Mozambique before the England trip, but in my mind I was thinking it's more important that I book the tickets for UK, I pay for the flights to the UK, and then with whatever money's left I'll go to Mozambique. And I realised one day I found myself saying to Miranda, if I go to Mozambique, ... And she said, what do you mean if you go to Mozambique? I thought you were going. And she challenged me that if I was putting the UK trip before the Mozambique trip, then somehow were my priorities right. She suggested I go off and have a walk and think about this. So, suitably chastened, I went for a walk. I took my dog for a walk, I walked up the hill behind our house. I sat on top of the hill and I started thinking. I was thinking, God, you know we need to go to England. You know we need to connect with our church. But as I thought about it, I thought, well, really, is that what I want? Is that my passion? Is that my priority? And obviously it wasn't. Mozambique was what I wanted to do. Mozambique was where my heart was. And I just felt this urge, I've got to go to Mozambique. I've got to get my priorities right. Making a video for Mozambique. This is the first video we were going to make as a communication team. And I wanted to kind of set a precedent. I wanted to put my priorities where they mattered. So I made a decision on top of that hill. I'm going to go to Mozambique. Come what may, I'm going to go. And I felt I needed to do something. So nobody else was around. I stood up on a rock, high up on this hill, and I shouted out as loud as I could, I am going to Mozambique. And then I walked down the hill. And when I got home, something had changed inside. Now, I love that line in the Walt Whitman poem, which is quoted in Dead Poets Society, about sounding my barbaric yawp over the roofs of the world. And there's something in that, in just standing up there and declaring out loud, I am going to do this. In our leadership courses, we talk about, we act out a crossing over, stepping over the line. And as we step over the line, we make a commitment. I'm leaving this behind and I'm stepping into a new future. Now, I didn't know that back then, but essentially that's what I was doing. Up on top of that hill, I stepped over the line. I made a faith statement. I am going to Mozambique. I didn't know how I was going to go. I didn't have the finances to go. It was a 3,000 kilometre journey that I was going to make in the car. I didn't have money for fuel, but I was going to go. I had an old video camera, but I didn't have a cameraman. I didn't have the skills to do the video, but I was going to go. The next day, amazingly, I got a phone call from the director of a media project near us, and she said, I've heard that you're going to Mozambique to make a video. Do you need an intern? Do I need an intern? So I said, yes, I'd love an intern. So she said she had a young Namibian guy called Louis, 19 years old, who'd just done a video training project, training school, and he needed a project to intern on. So she said he could come with me, he could make the video. And she said, how much would it cost for him to come? How much would it cost? I hadn't even thought about money. So I said, well, if he can pay for his food and maybe if he splits the fuel bill with me. So she said, fine. So a week or so later, I'd received another donation from a donor in the States to pay for the video. So we now knew that we could edit the video professionally with this media school. I had an intern. We set off. We drove 3,000 kilometres in my Toyota Hilux. We drove up to Mozambique. We met up with the rest of the team up there, and we set off on a trip down the Zambezi. Now, the Zambezi Delta at this point, the Zambezi is a kilometre wide. It's a huge river. It stretches 2,700 kilometres right across 5 nations of Africa. It's a massive river. The Zambezi Delta is something like 18,000 square kilometres of floodplains. And scattered in the Zambezi Delta, there are many subsistence fishermen living a life of subsistence way out in the middle of nowhere. Now, where we had been living in the town of Maromeo, this was already 300 kilometres from the nearest city, the nearest healthcare, the nearest hospital, the nearest banks. But for people living in the Delta, they were even further away. The Delta was really a 3-day canoe trip from our town, travelling in a dugout canoe. And people there were living hundreds of kilometres from anywhere. The guys in the Delta, they had never seen a doctor, they hadn't seen nurses, they hadn't had drugs, there were no schools there were no churches, there were no shops. It was a subsistence life. So we kitted out our canoes. We had this video camera of mine. We had no power, so we took 3 car batteries, we took a solar panel, we put it all into a large dugout canoe, which is basically one long log that's been carved out, and we paddled, 3-day canoe paddle down the river. We spent the next 10 days or so in the Delta making this video. Now, another day I'll tell you a story all about the people there in the Delta. But in those 10 days that we were down in the Delta, we were completely out of contact with the outside world. I didn't know what was happening in Cape Town. I didn't talk to Miranda for close to 3 weeks. Finally, we got out from the Delta with loads of footage. I phoned home to Miranda, and amazingly, in the time that I had been gone from Cape Town, gifts had come in. We'd been given enough money, and she'd gone ahead and bought the tickets for our flights to England. Now, whether this would have happened if I'd stayed in Cape Town, I don't know. But what I do know is that God gave me the opportunity to be involved in making this video. It was a fantastic project. I loved it. It was sheer adventure. Louis was great. Louis was 19 years old. He didn't speak a word of Portuguese, but he was a tough Afrikaans-speaking Namibian. He paddled all day. He jumped out in the mud. He made the videos. He endeared himself to everybody, and people loved him. And we had great fun. We made the video. And when we got back to Cape Town, Media Village helped edit a video. And we ended up with a 12-minute long video that promoted the work of YWAM Maromeo. And it was a fantastic video. And it started to be shown in different places. And very quickly, as people watched this video, they were impacted. People began to pray. People began to send us messages and say, can we send a team? A church in Cape Town said they wanted to send a team up. I tried to put them off, telling them how difficult the trip was, but they were all set on it. So very quickly, a team of doctors and nurses made the first trip up from the church in Cape Town into the Delta. And for the first time, drugs, nurses, doctors were there in the Delta, treating people. And over the following years, many teams from this church went up there. But it wasn't just that church. Interestingly, when I first showed the video back to our church in England, somebody came to me at the end and said, what you guys could really do with is a helicopter. A helicopter. But, interestingly, a helicopter pilot watched the video and emailed my team leader in Mozambique and said, could you use a helicopter? My friend emailed back and said, we could. This is a very remote area. A helicopter would be amazing, but we don't have any money to hire one. And the pilot wrote back and said, this is why I've come to Africa. He was living in Cape Town, living in South Africa with a ministry that was flying around. He said, this is why I've come to Africa, to serve in places like this. So he said, I'll raise the money for the fuel and I'll fly the helicopter up and I'll come up for a week and I'll see how I can serve you. So he flew his helicopter up from South Africa. He spent a week flying into the Delta from Maromeo and absolutely loved, was inspired by the ministry, flew people out to hospital, saved people's lives, and then committed to travelling back several times a year over the next few years and funding the flights himself from money that he was raising in other sources to serve the ministry there. Many people's lives were impacted by this, but there's one story that really struck me the most. This was a few years later, I think around 2010. The helicopter was there in Maromeo and the pilot was with the YWAM team, and they were praying about where they would go that day, and they decided they would visit one stretch of the river that they hadn't been to for a couple of years. They flew out to the stretch of river, and there was a sandy bank beside the river where they landed the helicopter. And what they didn't know was that just a few hours before they landed there, a man whose name, I'll call him Jose had been attacked by a crocodile. Now the Zambezi River has many hippos, many crocodiles, and lots of people lose their lives every year. And Jose was a fisherman. He had returned from fishing all night long, and he was washing in the river in the early morning when he was attacked by a crocodile. His friends managed to beat the crocodile off, but Jose had been seriously injured by this crocodile. His friends loaded him into the canoe, and they started the slow paddle up the river towards Maromeo. It would have taken hours and hours and hours, days really, to get to Maromeo, and almost certainly his life would have been lost. But as they paddled up the river, they saw the helicopter flying overhead and landing on the beach behind them. They turned around and they paddled quickly back down to the helicopter. And the helicopter pilot was able to load Jose into the helicopter, and within half an hour they'd flown him out, and he was being seen by first aiders in the town. His life was literally saved by this helicopter. When I heard that story, it took me back to my hilltop experience. Now, who's to say whether the video would have happened with or without me? Who's to say whether the helicopter pilot would have heard about the ministry there without the video? I don't know. But one thing I do know was that God gave me the opportunity to play my very small part in this. That God was writing a story anyway. God was painting a beautiful painting, a rich tapestry, and I had a small part to play in it. Now, I realised that I could have so easily missed that part. I could have said, no. I could have said, I don't have the money. I could have said, I need to prioritise going back to England. Thankfully, Miranda challenged me, where did my priorities lie? And thankfully, on top of that hill, I was able to see the light. And I was able to say, yes, this is what I'm going to do. And thankfully as well, God saw that. He took me at my word and he provided. And because of that, I was able to play a very small part in creating a story with God. And that's the beauty of living a life by faith. That's the beauty of volunteering. That's the beauty of stepping out, is that we get to play our very small part, but it's a vital part.